Well, thank you all for coming. Appreciate you taking your time out of your day to come and join us for the first community conversation for our strategic plan for equity. I'm Mary Heather Noble. For those of you who don't know, I'm a board member and currently chair of the Communications and Engagement Committee. So just a couple housekeeping things. Obviously, refreshments in the hallway. Please help yourself if you haven't already. We've got a couple of homemade things from board member Mary Gill, and I brought store-bought brownies. Sorry, but I love them. And bathrooms, I think the closest ones, although I'm not totally sure, but are by the auditorium. Are those the closest ones? So back through the hallway, past the main entrance.
The ones back there are equidistant, probably.
Yeah.
By the guidance office.
So if you need the restroom, that's where that is. And we may have other families come in, but if anybody has kiddos that need supervision, we have some volunteer students to help take care of that. So just a big thank you for the kids from moms who are holding out for that. So, and then the last thing is that I will need to go be at 6:30 to go catch my daughter in the choir concert over in the auditorium, and a few of you may need to as well. So please don't take it personally when I need to just jet. So hopefully we'll just be in the sort of informal question and answer or feedback part, and feel free to take as long as you want to. Don't get something when I need to jet. So a couple things. Just want to let you know what we're going to cover. Basically, we will just go over a quick overview of the strategic planning process, give you a sense of the phases, what we've covered to date, and where we are in the process. And then we'll have a little question and answer component for you guys to ask questions of the process or about the process, about our board goals and any of the information that's been generated along the way. And then we'll turn the tables and hopefully get some feedback from you all. We have 2 questions that we are hoping to get responses to related to our board goals from the community that hopefully will help direct our action team in moving the strategic plan forward from here. And then finally, we'll have a slide with some opportunities for additional engagement and some resources for where you can find more detailed artifacts from the process that's happened over this past year, and where you can find additional information and just plug in and just keep an eye on what's happening and when there's opportunities for you to further engage. So, I'm not really a pro at this, so forgive me. Okay, so the strategic plan process basically that we've been following is 4 phases. The first one started about a year ago in December of 2021 and took about an 8-month process through August of 2022. And basically it was initiated with creating an advisory committee. And you know what, I just realized I didn't go around and make sure that folks were introduced. So I introduced myself, but before I continue, let's just make sure we have other board members introduce themselves and also our
I'm Victoria Jetty.
And I'm Joanna Doria. I'm also on the Communications and Engagement.
Perfect. And admin?
Hi, I'm Nicole Carter. I'm the Director of Equity and Student Services.
I'm Caitlin Steele, the Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning.
Peter Burrows, Superintendent.
Emily Listine, Communications Director.
Perfect. Thank you. Sorry, I skipped over that. It's kind of important, especially when I need to go. So anyway, the first phase started last year, initiated with the district creating an advisory committee to do the work of kind of the initial groundwork of data collection, evaluating the data, and kind of providing the foundational information to initiate the board's strategic planning process. So the advisory committee was formed through an application process. I personally wasn't involved in that process, but Peter and Emily will probably be able to answer more specific questions about that when we get to that point. Basically, it was a process that tried to really get good perspectives that are often kind of left behind or marginalized. So we wanted to make sure that there was intention behind creating a really good cross-section of our learning community so that the perspectives brought to the table to get that initial data, to get those experiences, et cetera, included folks who aren't normally asked. And so ultimately it consisted of about 14 people of varying backgrounds and identities, included students, educators, some staff, a few at-large community members, and I believe Justin Campbell, our principal here at the high school, and Nicole, our director of equity and student services, also served. And then other leadership team members, including Emily and Peter, also helped. And then they, again, came together to just initiate the process of kind of compiling data, getting the information that was necessary to provide a good foundation for the board to initiate the process. So they worked with consultant Emily Mulvaney-Stanek with EM Strategies, and Lisa Ryan, racial equity leader, or I guess a racial equity coach, is that? Yeah. To work together with this advisory committee to really get some good, thorough direction on how best to collect the information that we were trying to get. To take a look at, what student experiences, staff experiences, community member experiences are throughout our district with an equity lens. So the advisory committee's charge was to help establish kind of a baseline definition of equity from the community, from the learning community's perspective, to advise ACSD on how to improve our community engagement processes, to provide some input on the data we needed to be able to really put a good strategic plan forward. And also to then, after compiling that data and evaluating the data, develop some priorities for the board to incorporate into the strategic plan goals. So there were 4 topic areas that the advisory committee worked on: school and social environment, academic environment, staff perceptions, and engagement and outreach. So, during this phase, and I think it was probably during the spring and summer mostly, the data collection component was really happening. So there were a number of methodologies used to compile data, including an equity audit or a diversity, equity, and inclusion survey that was done with the assistance of Hanover Research. Also a number of meetings with specific community groups, or sort of, I guess, subsets of folks who often work with, areas of our learning community whose perspectives really needed to be a part of this conversation. So folks like English language learner teachers, our school counselors, et cetera. And then there were, many of you may recall, surveys to get a sense of, parents' experience, student experience in the classrooms, et cetera. And, then there were also some one-on-one anecdotal data compiled for folks who were willing to come in and sort of share their experiences. So all of that was put together and kind of evaluated or analyzed by the advisory committee. And they were asked to, put together recommendations to the ACSD board. This is what they came up with based on what they found. And in general, some of the things that were highlighted were an equal distribution of resources across the district. Student experiences are different across the district. Some things about making sure that folks with different identities are included and feel safe and welcome in their schools and things like that. So the advisory committee put together these 5 recommendations, and I don't know if you can read them from here, and if there's handouts at the table, you might be able to see them a little bit better, but to prioritize social emotional needs of students and the entire school community, to dedicate permanent resources, staffing, and attention to equity work throughout the district, to develop and implement an equity-based rubric to help inform decision-making and evaluation of programs and practices. Also to provide leadership that is accountable and centers responsive practices to recruit, support, and retain staff that reflect the diversity of our learning community and focuses on the needs of our learners. And finally, work to ensure communication is concise and accessible so that all students, families, and staff have the info they need to succeed. So this essentially marked the end of the first phase. Once the advisory committee's work was done with those 5 recommendations, there was sort of a handoff of those recommendations to the board at the end of the summer, and that initiated phase 2 of the strategic planning process. So at this point, the information, hopefully with perspectives that are typically in our blind spots, have been included. We have data about the sort of differential experiences across our district based on different student identities, different schools, and we have these recommendations from the advisory committee on where the community thinks that the board should be focusing its goal setting. So the board then took that, and we had our board retreat on September 12th, and we were sort of guided through the next phase of the strategic planning process by Emma Mulvaney-Stanek and some other folks, actually, some representatives from the advisory committee, to sort of present the process that they had gone through and deliver the 5 recommendations that their group had come up with. And then we took those 5 recommendations and also their definition of equity and worked with that to make sure that it worked and made sense to our 13-member board. And then went through kind of your standard strategic planning process. So basically Emma guided us through this process of identifying our board values, identifying our core beliefs as a board, honing in on what we consider to be equity or educational equity, and then using that equity lens to take another look at our mission, our vision for the district, make tweaks as we felt necessary, and then really try to identify some goals that we could then move forward in the next phase of the strategic planning process. So just to give you a sense, some of you may have, I don't know, Emily, do these guys have those?
I have more of those.
Perfect. So we have a list that has the board goals, the board's core beliefs, our definition of equity, and they're on posters behind you as well. So I won't go through all of the details, but I will share with you, the process that we went through. We had the initial board retreat, and then we came together and did some follow-up work at a board meeting. We did have a small group of our board kind of help to take the work that we had done in our board retreat and in follow-up sessions to kind of tidy it up, clean up our work and present edits to the full board so that we could take it from there and move it forward. So it took a little bit of time to kind of go through that process, and then we identified 3 goals that we felt really should carry our work forward for the strategic plan in the next 5 years. And those goals are Everyone will feel safe, welcomed, and included in our schools in the district. Schools and families will be able to engage with the school system in valuable ways. ACSD will allocate resources to address students' needs across the district in equitable, sustainable, and fiscally responsible ways. ACSD will maintain infrastructure and facilities that support varied learning and successful outcomes for all of our students. And finally, our last goal, ACSD's learning environment will inspire a passion for learning and value diverse identities and abilities, while preparing our students to make positive contributions to our community and beyond. So that's kind of, what our board, what our 13-member board came up with and feel comfortable with in terms of making sure that we're incorporating our values, our core beliefs, our sense of what education equity means. And again, all of that was sort of based on the foundation that the advisory committee and their work had put together for us. So this is where we are in the process. We are basically coming up for air at this point to say, hey, we've gotten through, 2 phases of this process. This has been a long process already. We've spent a year doing some engagement to try to get lots of different perspectives on this work and the information that we're hoping to help sort of inform the work that we're doing as we move forward. And we want some feedback from y'all on how we can take the goals that we have approved as a board and how we can get everybody's perspective on translating those goals moving forward. So the next phase, after we complete this community engagement process, we will ask for some feedback from you all, and then we will take that feedback and also invite anyone who's interested to participate in the next phase. So the next phases are 3 and 4. 3 is to develop a strategic plan action team that will do the work of actually translating the board's sort of higher level goals into measurable outcomes, strategies, tasks, things that our educators can work on where the rubber meets the road to try to achieve the goals that the board has set. So we are, the applications to join the action team have already opened November 30th. And we will keep that application period open until the 16th. Just want to invite folks to apply to be a part of that strategic plan action team. And again, this is sort of an intentionally designed team where we want to make sure we have folks who, represent a good cross-section of our community, and also anyone who has particular expertise in areas where we have set goals. That would be good too. Yeah, quick question.
Yeah, so when you say that applications are open, who are the applications open to?
Anyone in our ACSD community.
So how was that communicated? Because I don't remember seeing anything.
So I know it's been in our district newsletter. I believe it's been posted on our website for a while.
Sure, I can give it up.
Yeah.
So I sent out a strategic plan email that's just about the strategic plan with hopefully anything you could need to find. So you can go back to that email. That is a standalone email. Then all the principals included a link in their Friday emails. They'll do that again in this Friday's emails. It's on the website under our drop-down under strategic plan. I put it on all of our social media with links so you can click right through to it. So hopefully wherever you are, there's a direct link to that application.
Okay, thank you. Perfect. Thank you, Emily. And so once that strategic plan action team is formed, then they will be sort of doing the work of translating the goals into these actionable, measurable outcomes, actionable tasks. And then there will be opportunities for additional community involvement along the way. So there'll be another time where, sort of pick our heads up and say, okay, here's where we're at. here's what we've done so far again, here's what we're thinking in terms of translating those goals. And so this part, this phase 3, is really the, putting the flesh on the skeleton of the strategic plan, right? So right now we've got our goals, and it's based on information that was generated from the advisory committee and the community. And now we're really turning to the action team to do the work of creating, the real plan part of the plan. So there will be, again, additional opportunities, and in a later slide we'll have a link for you to be able to plug into and just kind of keep your thumb on the beat of the strategic plan process. And then the final part of the final phase is for the strategic plan to be finalized and written as a single document that will then be taken back to the board for board review and approval. So that is the sort of 4-phase process.
All right, Heather, can I ask a couple? Oh, you're going into Q&A.
And now we're in Q&A. So I'm hoping you guys, just again, informal conversation. If I can't, or if our other board members can't answer, hopefully our administration will be able to help, since they were especially part of the advisory committee that we weren't a part of. So yeah, questions.
I was just going to ask a very easy one. How big are you thinking it will be?
By it, you mean?
Oh, thanks. The action committee or
The action team?
Yeah, action team.
I'm not sure.
I think we're looking at low teens right now, so we really want to focus on student representation. We have really strong student representation at the advisory committee, and we feel that having not just 1 or 2, but hopefully 3 students be able to be there as a group is really important. So spread the word to any secondary students you know, and then a couple of staff teachers, and then the administrators that are in charge of overseeing those areas, and parents. So it looks in the low teens. We don't want to set a specific number, but based on the applications, it'll be around there. Because the challenge is, once we start getting over 15, it becomes challenging to do the work.
Unwieldy.
Yes.
My other question was just, it's such a daunting task to develop a full strategic plan. So many directions you could go. Will it be seeded with some key questions or needs or key challenges? Maybe you don't know that already, or it's just going to be wide open, develop a strategy. And that's not a loaded question. That's a genuinely, that just in a genuinely curious sense.
Yeah, my sense is that, we'll be starting with the board goals and all the work that's been done prior, and that the action team will come together to identify and make sure that the priorities that have already been conveyed in the process are incorporated into translating the high-level goals into actionable outcomes, or actionable tasks and with measurable outcomes. So I would expect, just based on, some of the work that's already been, the groundwork that's been laid already, that, tackling problems like, equal distribution of resources, tackling things like inclusion, and making sure that folks across our entire district are feeling equally welcome into schools and into board activities. And so, I can't speculate because I'm not on the team, but my sense of having gone through strategic planning in other venues, that you sort of start with the goals and identify, kind of look at the work that's been done and see the things that are bubbling to the top and tackle those. Does anybody else want to add to that before?
Follow-on question onto that, just while we're on it. Will there be someone facilitating that process? Because from an external person facilitating it, because it seems like that group of people wouldn't necessarily have the skill set to do that, and administrators could potentially kind of dominate.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. My understanding is yes, and I don't know if I would assume it's still going to be Emma Mulvaney-Stanek, who is kind of helped guide along the way. And again, she's really helped the district to really make sure that we're looking at our blind spots and being mindful of considering perspectives that aren't always the first to just come out, if that makes sense. So yes, it would be, I mean, by necessity, we have to have a professional kind of help us through,
Right.
through the process, so. Yeah, Chris, you had a question?
Yeah, my question is, when you talk about actionable steps, how concrete are we thinking? So like, for example, you know, we've had a few, what I think of in my head as strategic things that we've implemented in the last few years, like IB or the 6th grade move, things like that. Are we, when we talk about actionable steps, are we talking about like big picture, concrete implementation things like that, like those 2 examples, or is it a little bit more, like where does it fall between strategy and here's what we're doing, you know, concretely, I guess, and how's that laid out in the plan?
You know, I sort of am reluctant to say with any certainty, you know, how specific something will be. I mean, I think that kind of depends on the professional opinions of the folks involved and the team itself, and really looking at how best to tackle something. So if we're looking at, for example, like wanting to make sure that we are working on literacy and making sure that all of our kids across the whole district have, you know, equivalent access to tools to address those things, I would expect, you know, the folks that are going to be involved in the specificity of tasks are going to be the ones who are most knowledgeable in how do we address those issues. I myself am not an expert in that, but that's kind of why the action team needs to be built with folks who have that competency. And certainly, you know, along the way, the board will, you know, ultimately it has to be approved by the board. So if there's something that doesn't feel like it's hitting the mark, or, you know, gonna kind of jive with our the work that's been done so far, I would expect it would, we'd have to sort of circle back and try again. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
It's not, I mean, I guess the way I would interpret that is it's a little bit open and it might depend on
Right.
the issue.
Yeah.
There's no big, I don't think anyone on the board has a preconceived notion of like something
Here's
they're
what it'll
hoping
look
to
like.
be able to implement,
Right.
whether that's like something new curricularly
Yeah.
or from a technology point of view. There's, I think I can speak for the board that there's not like a preconceived notion, and so we too are waiting for the action team
Yeah.
to gather and begin work
Yeah.
to see where it leads us.
Yeah.
And part of the action to the commission, I do believe, is to identify where some of the inequities lie. And so first is gathering that information, doing that work, and then sort of the planning will come after that.
Any other questions? Yeah.
I'm just curious about, this is kind of more of a broader suggestion, because there's been many opportunities, including in your first phase of this, but also outside of the equity discussion, for in schools and in the district to invite parents to apply and participate in things, which is great. But I know from my personal experience and experience of many other parents that they make the effort to apply and then they never hear anything. And there's no sense of how people are selected, why people are selected, what the process was. That doesn't feel very transparent, although I have to trust that it's done well. But there's no follow-up about that. No one ever sends an email to say, thank you so much for engaging. But we've compiled our committee this way.
Yeah.
So just a suggestion to keep parents wanting to help.
Yeah.
You gotta value the people that show up even
That
if
take
they
the
don't.
time, yeah, absolutely. And actually, I mean, what you're speaking to actually drives right at the heart of one of our questions, to really, you know, make it easier for folks to engage with the board. So that's really, really valuable feedback. I really appreciate it. And yeah, it's something that can be.
I would just add, for the advisory committee in particular, for those 2 issues, we really looked at what are the main things that keep people from participating, right? So childcare, the fact that they might have to take off of work, so we really made an effort to have childcare. We did a stipend for the advisory committee. We tried to hit those pain points, and also just asking people rather than expecting them to self-select in, which is often how we get groups, and we really wanted to flip that. I can say for that process only, that's the only one I was involved in, we did send emails back because we wanted the
I never
people-
received one.
Really? Okay, well, that's strange, I'm sorry. That
That's
shouldn't
okay,
have happened. Because the goal was that those people would be able to participate in other ways and other, so that was an
Well,
oversight
that's
on our
good,
part.
yeah. Good. I mean, it's kind of a general, it's not just this example, there's been many examples, for me and for other parents, I know, yeah.
That is frustrating.
Yes.
You had a question?
Yeah. Do you know what percentage of participation you had from the students in the survey?
I don't have those figures right off the bat, but I know, so at the end of this, there's resources, and one of the things is just our strategic planning drop down on our on the district website. And in that, sort of embedded in that, are like all the sort of data reports along the way. And I know that, for example, the Hanover Research Report has a pretty thorough, kind of tabulation of what the response rates were for the equity audit. I'm not really sure off the top of my head. Do any of you guys have?
So we ran both of those surveys within TAs or homerooms, so we did get a higher percentage because of that, though that doesn't mean that students actually fill it out. And I know that I wrote those specific numbers in somewhere, so those numbers do exist. The feedback was, or the response rate was fairly high. We only surveyed middle and high school students for that survey, and then the rest was parent perceptions if they had younger students.
And I just had another question, because I was thinking about if you're trying to get student representation, like you probably can't survey like K through maybe 5 or 6. I mean, well, maybe up to 4, but how did you get that representation? Did you specifically try to target parents of students in that age group, like the ones who can't fill out the survey because they're too young?
It was to all parents, so.
No, I mean for the committee part, like who was on the committee.
The advisory committee?
Correct.
Yes, so we basically looked at all of the people who had applied and tried to get a diverse cross-section, especially looking at those underrepresented groups.
Right, so there were some parents of like younger
Yes.
age children
Okay.
represented on there, and then there were also students, secondary students, so I think they were all high schoolers. And I can't remember right off the top of my head who, but I'm sure there was middle school representation or parent representation as well. And some folks kind of served as double, they might be a teacher and a parent, or they might be a parent, of a younger person, and also, represented a perspective of, a marginalized community, if that makes sense. I know he had a question first, and then Kurt, I know you've got this, so go ahead.
I noticed the theme of permanent resources, and I was wondering if there's an update, because I've had several students ask about the disappearance of the Black Lives Matter flag, and I know that was really, really appreciated last year. And so I'm just wondering what action needs to happen from the community for the board to consider investing in something for long term that has to do with student equity and showing our Black students that we care about them in a school that's really struggled, speaking about the high school, with anti-Blackness in recent years.
Right, that's a great question, and a very specific question in terms of the strategic plan. I would say just in general, anyone who has something that they would like the board to discuss should reach out to the board, and it can be a number of ways. It can be emails to all board members, it could be through public statement at our public meetings, or reaching out to administration. So that's, always an avenue. And then specifically with respect to, incorporating that perspective into, the planning, I would say, for those students who have that specific interest to apply to this process. So I'm going to grab Kurt first, and then.
The student response rate was 59%, I remember that, which is a really high for any kind of survey. The parent response was estimated, because they didn't really know how many families there are represented.
Right.
6 through 12 was 9%, but I think they my quick reading of it looked like a pretty big overestimation of how many families that represented, but good student response.
Yeah. And I can't remember if is that from the report, the Hanover, the equity?
Yeah. And then, question on the sort of new committee. When will those meetings happen? How many are envisioned? How long is that process?
Yeah, I'm gonna turn that question over to admin on that, because that's not something I'm specifically involved with, or I don't think anyone on the board is specifically involved in that process, so if you guys have thoughts on that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I mean, some of this is still in formation, but the current thinking is meeting twice a month, potentially once a month with the kind of a larger action team, and then to have more people involved, break that out. The board has 3 goals, and so, you know, one thing we're doing right now is looking at those 3 goals and trying to determine what do they really mean in terms of what kind of participation do we need, what kind of people do we need to be leaning in on those 3 questions. So probably meeting once a month with this larger group, and then potentially splintering off into 3 groups, looking at each of those 3 separate goals. And those groups could be malleable, so they don't necessarily have to be the same group every month. They could be bringing in different experts. You might want to bring in someone from local agencies. You might want to bring our special educators together. You might want to bring other people together. So that kind of porous approach, I think, could be helpful in terms of getting more people involved and more voices at the table, so that it's not just a small group that's kind of working and carrying us all the way to the finish line.
Let me go back to you and then, yeah, real quick.
This was just a side note. I was struck when I heard that the Black Lives Matter flag isn't currently being, how do you say it? It's not there anymore. And I'm just curious, I know this is like a side conversation, but just when was it decided not to fly it anymore?
So when the board decided to take the action to raise the flag, I believe there was a time frame put on that decision, and that was through the end of last academic year. And then at the end of that year, it was taken down. So that's what the board approved last year, and so that's what was carried out. Yeah.
Okay.
Other questions? Yeah.
This is more of a comment. I'm brand new to this conversation. I'm glad to be here, but I've been a part of conversations like this in many other arenas. And I just want to underscore as a perspective about the importance of having consultants who are helping to facilitate this strategic action plan meeting, because of the documented unequal burden that is often borne by community members of color in particular, and also others from other marginalized, who represent marginalized groups. And I'm wondering, I think we probably will have a chance to talk about this, but it's related to this, what would it make it easier? I think about a couple of specific policy recommendations from Lisa Ryan and Tabitha Moore that they've offered to the select board through their 18-month consulting process, but one of them was whenever there's a group that's a voting body, and I don't know if this is a voting body, but the group might choose to actually have codified as a policy that anyone who's representing marginalized background, that their vote actually counts twice, because in terms of like demographic representation of, say, Black students who are here at Middlebury, they're never going to outnumber the white students who are in the group. And so how do we make sure that if they're coming, bearing the unequal burden of the labor to do this work in this setting and any other setting that they're a part of when they're not a part of the demonstrated dominant culture, how are we making sure that the statement of valuing their opinions gets codified into the decision making? And then I'm wondering if there's been any consideration about compensation or any way to monetarily demonstrate that value through some kind of recognition or compensation for participation in that work.
Yeah.
Those are great. I can take all of them.
Yeah.
You want me to?
Yeah.
So absolutely, I'm so glad you brought up all of those things. So Emma Mulvaney is our consultant, works with Lisa Ryan specifically to keep all of those issues at the forefront. We talked about them lot during the advisory committee process. And so yes, we did offer a stipend for the advisory committee, and we are going to offer a stipend again for this committee. Childcare has been a real challenge. I couldn't be a bigger advocate for it. We rely on our students a lot, and we have to be a little bit inconsistent, but we want to support folks both with childcare, computer accessibility issues. On the advisory committee, we also had a multilingual parent there, so we had an interpreter for her there at the meeting, which was a really big learning process for us. It was wonderful, and it led to the creation of our new multilingual liaison position. So everything you're talking about is absolutely at the forefront.
And again, I think things that are typically in that blind spot territory, right, that aren't necessarily coming to the forefront as we're moving ahead with these sort of things. So it's been really good to kind of slow it down and have folks who are specifically trained to help us look in those blind spots to help us through this process. So, Chris, yeah.
I want to follow up on something Joanna said earlier, because I actually didn't realize. I think I don't know, put words in your mouth. I think what you said was that the committee, the action team would actually at first be responsible for gathering data. Am I understanding that
That's my understanding.
correctly? Because I guess I didn't realize that, and I'm just curious, like, what is that expectation if that's something that team is doing, or are they relying more on data that the district is giving them, or I'm just sort of an open-ended question, like how does that factor into this process?
We've collected so much data through this process and through this board. We've been calling it evidence to beyond just quantitative data, also qualitative data. So through the advisory group and through the Hanover survey, plus the evidence and data that we live in as an administrative team. So I think that we'll come with what we have and really ask our team, what are we missing? And then I anticipate, I don't know how it will play out, but I suspect that between sessions, we'll have marching orders to go gather more information targeted at the questions that our team has and the gaps that are clearly present in our work when we come to the table. That's what I'm imagining will play out.
I should know the answer, I think you guys probably said this, but the advisory committee, is there a report that came out of that has data, that type of, okay.
Yes, and all of that again is accessible through, so if you go to the strategic plan dropdown, there's lots of if you're looking for this, here, if you're looking for that, here, and it'll take you right to the report. So it's a pretty thorough kind of collection of the artifacts that have been generated along the way. And that's not to say that there are things that we still don't know yet, that more additional data collection or making sure that we're gathering things that maybe haven't been gathered in the past or need to be done, but yeah. So did you have a question or something to say, Nicole? I thought you, okay. Jason?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how best to phrase this question. In other sort of diversity and equity stuff that I've been involved with, a lot of times there's a lot of very sort of big goal articulation, and then when it comes to doing action, is about very marginal changes, trying to create a little thing for this group of people, or change language in order to make this feel more inclusive. But so I guess my question, which is, maybe it's more just a request, is that everything be put on the table. Because I feel like oftentimes I can imagine a situation here where people spend a lot of time trying to come up with good, really strong ideas, and that there's pushback from various forces. It basically just says, yeah, we can't deal with that here. Okay, and some of that might be very admirable, like in the idea of saying, oh, it's too hard, or that is just too complicated. Some of it is less admirable. That's the way we've always done it. It's something that many of us have heard in various institutions. So, like I said, I don't know how to phrase this as a question, but rather just as a warning, maybe, or as a request that this get really foregrounded in the empowerment of a group to make recommendations that aren't just about tweaking things, but actually really looking at some pretty core problems that, at least as a parent, I see,
Yeah.
and I imagine other people see in different ways.
Yeah, no, I think your point is well taken, and I think, you know, it's a real opportunity for us to really look at systematic change, and kind of really examine how we do things, and look at it from this different perspective and, you know, make the necessary changes. And, you know, there's always gonna be more work than is possible to achieve in a 5-year period, but to your point, I wholeheartedly agree that it needs to be more than like, let's create a committee to do whatever, and then, you know, have a special day, or, you know, it needs to be more meaningful. Martha, yeah?
Well, and it also has to have money behind it.
Right.
And so I assume there are recommendations, and then it goes to the board, and then that's a conversation about the pot of money.
Yeah.
Or is there already earmarked money that's sort of starting to go towards this?
You know, so, I mean, I can't say with any, I don't believe that there's earmarked money for, well, I don't know the answer to that actually, Peter. Is there's money specifically from the state in the equity work? Or is
I
this
mean,
just?
we're supporting the process, right? So we're supporting our consultant and
Right.
all the other pieces. I think we're waiting to see where we end up, to see what the ask will need to be, and we have plenty of flexibility to kind of figure out if there are things, you know, because we're in budget cycle right now. So this process will, you know, hopefully be ending around June. We would be looking to kind of make a bridge to, if there are things that we want to start at the beginning of next year or in the summer, we would probably work to figure out within our current budget that we're building right now, how to make that happen, and then talk about it in the fall, this time next year. Yeah.
Then moving forward, I mean, essentially a budget is kind of a statement of your priorities, right? So, yeah, you know, moving forward, if things need to be sort of reconfigured to address inequity or, you know, inclusive accessibility issues, then the budget will by necessity need to, yeah.
One more statement about engagement. Oh, sorry.
So I just wanted just to finish that. I mean, I think one of the things that is really important, as speaks to what Jason was sharing, is you can't leave it.
There's a concert.
I didn't
Kids are
I
ready.
didn't do that.
No, that's okay. I'll stick around.
No, but I see a lot of districts tackle equity by hiring a position, putting it off on the side and saying we're doing something. And we started this process with the realization that that's the path of least resistance. It's the path that a lot of people go. And we want to shift our culture. This is about changing culture. It's not about one or two minor tweaks or things that we can do to change things. It's a community-wide issue. It's not just in schools. I mean, our students are spending, you know, 3/4 of their life, actually more, many days of their lives outside of school, and in one day they're only here for 7 hours. So these issues are, and we've seen this, and we saw this really spike during the pandemic. These are issues in our society. So we have to be putting our arms around the whole thing. And I think, you know, I believe there will be out of this plan really strategic, like, action steps to do, but they're not going to just be hiring an equity coordinator. Now we're set. We're doing equity. We can't do that. We have to address it. We have to have the hard conversations. We have to see our work through an equity lens if we're going to make a difference. And I think that's where this process has to include a lot of people, and we have to generate this outside of what sometimes in educational institutions becomes very much in a small room, strategizing, figuring out how to make change, and you go to make the change and everybody's in their silos doing their thing, and it doesn't make the impact. We gotta push beyond it. So that is our intention.
I'm gonna make one last plug, and piggybacking off of, I'm sorry, I didn't catch her name, but on being intentional. I hear a lot of intentionality around respecting people's access needs when it comes to language, ethnicity, race, and socioeconomic. I don't hear any talk about access needs related to neurodivergence. I can think of many students, many parents who cannot participate in most of the ways that the district presents to us to participate. A lot of neurodivergent people can't stand up at a mic and say comment in 3 minutes to the board. And I think it's really important to have that at the forefront. I think when we think equity, we generally think of these other issues which are huge and important and intersect with this. And it's important to keep that in mind for the work, but also for how you engage the community.
That's great. And again, great suggestion to put on our question board as well. So folks, it's 6:30 and I need to go soon, but just want to take the opportunity to present the questions that we're hoping to get some feedback on. And there's a couple of different ways we can do this. So you have Post-its at your tables. You guys can write any ideas, like some of the ones that you've already generated, and put them on the posters back there. We also have a handout that we'll pass out that's actually like a board feedback form that you can write on that and leave it at the tables, and we'll collect that. Our committee is basically compiling all of this feedback, and then we'll present to the board and to basically kick off, hand over to the action team, so that all of this information, just anecdotal feedback, can be directed to the right places. You'll notice on that form, there's also a link to an online Google form. So if your preference is to do it electronically, you can take this home. You don't need to write on the spot. You can do it electronically and submit it that way. And always, any of our board emails are accessible, so you can send emails to the board, and we will, compile it, kind of file it, make sure it gets to the right place. So the two questions that we really want to ask are these, and we try to sort of keep it simple. We have lots of questions that we would love to ask. But one, just again, kind of starting from our board goals, the 3 board goals, what does meeting the strategic plan, or what does meeting those goals mean to you or look like for you? And so for your family and from your perspective, it might mean something totally different than from someone sitting at another table. We're interested in all of it. So, it can be as simple or as elaborate as you want to share, as specific or as broad. All of it is relevant to the board and the action team, so that we can have that, I guess I sort of think of it as like sort of guardrails as we're, honing in on some specific strategies to make sure that we're heading in the right direction based on the feedback we're getting from people. And then secondly, this obviously just Joanna and I, from our committee's perspective, what would make it easier for you to engage with the board in this process, but also beyond. We're really trying to figure out the best way to, develop a relationship with the ACSD community, and, try to find that sweet spot of what we can sustain as a board and the limited bandwidth we have. We are a volunteer board, and make sure that the energy that we spend is well spent, so that we're not, spinning our wheels doing something and calling it engagement when it's not really landing with folks. So want to make sure that you have an opportunity to just give your thoughts on that, keeping in mind that, we may not be able to do it all, but it does help to have some direction from the people who are interested. So, Chris.
Okay,
you
I'll
probably
just
have
throw out
one
my
now.
bias there. Come to the Friends meetings for the schools that have them.
Totally, and
Yeah.
actually,
They all have them now.
Do they all have them
They
now?
all have
Oh, wow.
them. We have contact.
Yes.
And I'm biased, obviously.
Like you said that because we talked about that. We had that like on our to-do list, kind of after this, to start, getting regularly in front of that, just to have, these kind of conversations.
And we have a lot more presentations.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I've got to go. Please,
But I'm
Have some
here,
snacks.
enjoy the staying, thank you, we'll be around if anyone